Howdy, howdy. Welcome back. We are in the middle, actually just beginning, another Workshop Wednesday. This is a strategy session. This is something that's going to be for those of you who are maybe not implementers, but need a little bit of help along the way, thinking through some stuff. We're going to help you out, specifically with a topic that is highly relevant at the moment, Facebook and Apple and all the junk that's going on between those two companies, what you need to know, how to think about it, and kind of what to do next. So we'll be talking about all of that today. Before we go too far into this, of course, welcome. If this is your first Workshop Wednesday, my name is Chris Mercer. Everybody calls me Mercer. I'm the co-founder of measurementmarketing.io, and maybe you found us through the podcasts and talks that we do, maybe some of the other platforms that we have shared some of our content with, and of course, measurementmarketing.io if you're already a member over there, whether it's a free toolbox member or you're already part of the Measurement Marketing Academy. However you found us, happy that you're here. It's our job to help people like you to figure out how to use all these fun tools like Google Analytics and Tag Manager and how to measure stuff. However, we use a framework for that. And the reason we cover this framework each and every time is because if you get nothing else from this workshop, if you just start using this framework, it will help you to improve your own marketing results. First, planning. You got to figure out what questions are important to answer, what information you need to collect to be able to get those answers, and ultimately, what actions will you take based upon the answers that you get. Then you do the build out, where it's like Tag Manager and Google Analytics, maybe some more advanced stuff that we'll talk about today. Then there's the reports, where you're taking a look at maybe the ad platforms or Google Analytics reports or a Google Data Studio dashboard or maybe a spreadsheet, whatever it is. You're getting reports now that tell you what your numbers are. Once you've got those numbers, you can start to forecast your near future based upon what your past has been like. And then ultimately you get to measure against your forecasts. That will tell you where to optimize. In other words, where you're hitting the mark and where you're not. So it makes it a lot easier when you understand how to use measurement using this measurement marketing framework. Now, with all of these workshops, one thing, one new idea, one concept is all you're really looking for, because there's a lot to it. We are actually going to cover a bunch of different stuff around today's topic. So this one might be one you have to rewatch a few times just to kind of get the most out of it. But that's why we keep it here for you, so that you can. All right, with that, let's go ahead and officially get underway. Strategy session, Facebook versus Apple, what you need to know. Now, I'm just gonna go ahead and dive right in like we always do, only this time, again, being a strategy session, this is just about how to think about what's happening right now and what this whole concept is. And I'm going to start with the premise that maybe you don't know everything that's going on, but you've maybe heard some stuff that's happening with this person right over here, this little iOS, right? So iOS, Apple and iOS 14 specifically, they're making some big changes. So what they're basically doing, I'm going to kind of show kind of what used to happen and what is going to happen, kind of do it like that. And this is kind of in the process of happening, literally. So you might use iOS 14 and you might access an app on iOS. And I'm gonna do this as both, iOS 14. Let's just do it like this. We'll do iOS 14 and we will do Chrome, right? Just like another operating system, whatever it is. We'll just use Chrome as an example, but obviously Windows, could go into that. So we've got the iOS 14 version of stuff, and we've got what others will do like Chrome. So what used to happen is you would access the app, and then the app would send all of its stuff to the motherships, right? Whether it be Google, Facebook, whatever else. It was just sort of send all the user data. And this is sort of how stuff worked. This is normal. This is what it's always been doing. It's been doing this for many, many years, et cetera. So you kind of get the idea, right? The apps are being clicked, and then they're sending everything up to the mothership. Yeah, I get the whole data privacy thing. And of course, so does Apple. They've made a decision long ago. They're really going to err on the side of making it simple for people to be more private. That essentially means they're going to do it for people, as opposed to having to do a bunch of bells and whistles, which is what Facebook does, right? Facebook says, oh yeah, we'll make it private for you, but you've got to go and you've got to opt out of all this stuff and set up your settings and everything else. It makes it a little more complicated, to be honest, right? To be fair, it's harder to do that with Facebook. Apple's saying, you know what? We're not going to make you do all that. You don't have to opt out. We want you to opt in to being measured. This is what's causing all the hoopla. So now remember, Chrome, other operating systems, not doing that. So anything else is kind of, moving on the way it is normally moving on. However, what's happening here is when they go to use the app, there's going to be a little permission that they're being set up, right? And they're basically saying, hey, is it okay that this app tracks you, measures you, right? Does stuff. And collects information. Is it okay to do that? Which of course, most people are going to be like, nope, because it's not going to destroy the functionality of the app. It's just going to keep the app from phoning home, from phoning to all these different platforms. And so that's what's causing all the hoopla, just kind of, general concepts. And I'm not going to get too much into the technical definition of this because this is a strategy session. I don't think it's important you know that it's ATT and IDFA and all the other stuff that's going on. I think it's important you know sort of the general idea of what's happening and how, as a marketer, when you're looking at the strategy of this stuff, what the landscape's going to look like and how to deal with it. So long story short, again, to recap it, iOS is basically putting this big giant permission block in front of apps. So when the app opens up, it's going to say, do you want to be measured? Most people are, at this point, they're going to say no, which makes sense. I would expect that's going to be the same thing. Because remember, it's not going to discount the functionality of the app. The app still works. It's just not going to be able to send information back through iOS, is going to send it back to Facebook or Google. So what's going to happen for the most part, and again, some of this is time will tell because this is all very, very new. So everyone's trying to figure out, what the lay of the land is as we go through here. But essentially what's going to start happening is you're going to have, let's kind of make this nice little blue here. You're going to have this little blue aspect where you might not have everything that you once had, right? Whereas Chrome and everything else might report back to Facebook, but apps from Apple, specifically iOS 14, maybe not. Becomes a little harder. So this is what freaked out Facebook. And Facebook has done multiple webinars in the month of January for sure. They wrote articles about it. They took out full page ads in newspapers. So they are on this big freak out because they're saying Apple's going to hurt everybody doing this, right? Because if nobody can measure, if your apps can't be measured, then Facebook can't target, and that's going to hurt small business. All right, we'll take that a little bit with a grain of salt, big bowl spoonful of salt, because it's in Facebook's interest to have information, and they're not going to have it. That's essentially what's going to happen. So this is where we are. Now, the first instinct that our students have asked is, okay, I understand people don't want to be measured, so how do we measure them? And you got to realize what you're asking, right? People that don't want to be measured shouldn't be measured. And I know that sometimes you want to roll your eyes and be like, well, I get it, but really I got to know the information. So how do I get it? Like, I get it, but I need to know it. So how do I get it? Just realize that's going to be a losing question to ask, because people that don't want to be measured, want their data private, don't want to phone back to the motherships all the time. That's the whole point. They don't want to, so you can't measure them. There's going to be that aspect of doing that. Now, that said, measurement will change and evolve. And so in this case, what's happening is iOS is, when the app opens, the app's going to define if it needs to go back to Facebook or Google or whatever else, right, through iOS. And if that's turned off, which a lot of people are probably not going to opt into that. And remember, this is like people don't have the choice. They don't have to go and find a setting on their iOS phones to do this. It'll just start happening relatively quickly if it hasn't already, where they'll open up an app and it'll say, hey, this app wants to measure you. Is that okay? And people are going to be like, nope. Right? So this is going to start happening quickly. And so as that happens, right, this kind of goes, what we kind of reference as dark data in-house. It's not technically the definition of dark data, but the idea is that there's going to be stuff going on, these behaviors happening on the apps where the apps won't be able to tell the platforms what's going on. Now, remember, this also includes things, potentially like Google Analytics, right? So even not just Google in terms of ads, right, or Google ads, but Google Analytics, right? So things like that might not know what's going on from iOS 14. Because these apps are essentially not going to phone home through the motherships. So you will have that element. That's the first thing I want to talk about how to deal with that world that is clearly coming our way, right? You and I are going to have to face this world where there is less data available to us today. And guess what's going to happen tomorrow? There will be even less. And guess what will happen by the end of this year? It will be even less. And guess what will happen a couple years from now? It will be even less. And I wanted to make this workshop to both kind of foreshadow what's coming and also, and not to be cataclysmic, because it's not. It's just, okay, let's take a breather and remember where we are. We got really used to having a ton of information at all point. That's technically where the term dark data came from, because people were collecting so much data that they weren't using it. There's surveys out there that basically say 90% of data that's collected nobody uses, right? That's technically dark data. What we're talking about here is, now that we know this mess is going to happen, how do we deal with it? So I wanted to give you just a couple of things to think about as we go through it. So when you're measuring your conversion funnels, okay, and this is a phrase you will hear me say many, many, many times, certainly this year in 2021 as I'm recording this, the map is not the territory. It's not my phrase. It's just one of my favorite phrases right now. The map is not the territory. So here's what we mean by that. When you have a map, right? When you're looking at a map, whether it's a GPS, whether it's a road atlas, for those of you old enough to remember that maps used to be printed on paper, and you're looking at the map It does not mean it's a representation of the land in front of us, right? It's a representation. It's not the exact duplicate of land. Somebody could close a road and the app might not know that the road is closed yet. So it's going to tell you to go down the road. Maybe it's a one-way road and the app doesn't know it's one way. So it tells you to go down it. Well, it's just a representation. It could be wrong, but it's supposed to be a useful representation somewhere where we can navigate as we go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. Now, so that's the idea. The map is not the territory. Remember this phrase. I'm going to write it down here because it's important and you're going to want to repeat this as your mantra for this year. The map is not the territory. Okay. So we will come back to this over and over again. So I'm going to make this a big little headline up here. The map is not the territory. So this, in a marketing parlance, this is going to be our map when you think about your customer journey, when you think about your sales funnels, right? Step 1 might be the lander. And then step 2, and I'm going to keep this very simple, cart. Step 3, let's just call this checkout. So, because lander, and could be just a product page, could be a product detail page if you're an e-commerce store, whatever. It doesn't matter. There's always that multiple steps to the journey. And then there's sort of like the thank you, right? When you buy the thing or complete the action you want them to complete. So from a marketing standpoint, this is our map. We do step 1, step 2, step 3. And not really this. And for those of you who have watched our results and how workshops, Workshop Wednesdays, what we're talking about, what we're about to talk about here. It's this stuff. When you measure and you know that on average, 10% of the people go from step 1 to step 2, and on average, let's say 30% of those people complete the checkout to ultimately create the sale. This is actually our map, this 10 and the 30%. The percentages are your map. They tell you that if you send in, let's say 100 people here, that 10%, right? Because we're using our map. This is why it's important to measure. This is why we talk about the measurement marketing pillars. We do planning, building, reporting, forecasting. So we can start to say, okay, well, out of 100 people, roughly 10 will be at the checkouts next week or whatever the thing is in our forecast. And of those, since we know 30% of the people who start the checkout of 30% will complete, that means we're going to have 3 sales, right? And of course, you would tie it into average cart value and everything else to figure out your true revenue. But for now, we're going to keep it very simple. And just think about this. This is our map. This full thing here, right? So what the steps are, the percentage in between the steps, the percentages being the most important part of this, because we're going to come back to this in a second. And we can see, okay, well, now that I know my map, now that I know how my customer journey works, how my sales funnel works, I know that of 100 people, 10% or 10 will go to the second step. Of those 10, roughly 3 out of 10, 30% will end up. I can now predict. And I can say next week, I'm going to send 100 people. Here's how my funnel is going to work. I can start to predict. I have a useful map. I can move through my business, right? The territory of my business now because I have my map. And then Apple does their thing. So this is what I mean. We're going to remember this again. The map is not the territory. I'm going to give you kind of the after. So this is the before, right? This is the nice before times. Here's the after times. So in fact, I'm going to take these before times and put them in gray because they are kind of going away. And this is what you will notice as you go through this. You want to make sure that you're looking for this in your numbers to expect it because you're going to absolutely see it. So let's go ahead and highlight these. I'm going to make them all kind of grayed here. Okay. So now we've got kind of our gray versions of all of this. So what's going to happen is as Apple does their thing, rolls out their changes, right? And they come through. What you will notice is some of the data goes away, right? Maybe we had all the information to be able to collect every single little step that we wanted, and that was awesome back in the day. However, remember the map is not the territory. So the new way of doing it, where we get our information, we might, again, this is where you measure. You're always measuring over and over again. And this is where you're going to notice the difference because your forecasts are going to start to just kind of fall apart a little bit, at least temporarily. And that's because the map is changing. Okay. So we're going to say the map is not the territory to the map is changing. And this is how we think about this. Remember, the map is changing. So as the map changes, you will start to see oddball numbers, things that don't quite match up, and you start to see a trend. Another saying we have at measurementmarketing.io, the truth is in the trend, the power is in the pattern. So when your team, whether it's you getting your own numbers or you seeing the numbers come back in a report from your team, from your implementation teams, you're going to start to see some weirdness where you expect it'll be 10%. But all of a sudden, it might not be that. It might show, okay, well, out of 100 people that see this first lander, only, let's say, 5 make it through the checkout. And of those 5 that make it through the checkout, let's say 10% make it through, or 1. I'm going to change this back here. Only 1, right? This is when you're measuring these stages, the measuring at the bottom here. When you measure these stages, you see these start dropping down because again, dark data, right? So you don't have access to all the stuff. Let's pretend it really was 3, it really was 10, really was 3, like in the real world. Again, at this point, you're never going to know that because you just won't be able to measure certain things. And that's okay, because that's going to happen. We have to be ready for it. So it's, what do we do when we know that we're only measuring 5 here? Whatever we can measure, we only get 5. Whatever we can measure, we only get 1. Well, first things first, I want to talk about this step. And this is the strategy part of this. When you're working with your teams, this thank you step, where are you getting purchase from? You have to make sure that every step that you're measuring is you're getting the most useful truth for that step. So the most useful truth in terms of a purchase would be the cart itself, because that's the thing that's taking credit card details. So what's going to start to happen is if you look at analytics, like something like Google Analytics or even Facebook, where it says, we started 100 people, only 5 made it to this step, and 1 fired a conversion pixel back. You might look in your cart, and your cart is really the number you should be pulling from. The cart's going to say something like 3, and you go, okay, 3, cool. So I know my sales number is 3 here, right? Because this step is better used from the cart. So now we know at least we don't have missing data there because the cart is always going to have the right number when it comes to the number of sales. Now, these other steps that might be pages or page views or clicks or whatever else that you're measuring on the site, a little harder to figure this stuff out, right? Some of it's going to go dark. Some of it you're not going to have access to anymore. You're not going to be able to measure it. So you're going to have partial data coming through. So there are 2 things that's going to happen. Facebook is going to start modeling. So what they're going to do is basically say, well, 5, and hypothetically, they might come back and say, well, we think it was really 8. And they'll do stuff like that, right? They'll be modeling it based on what they know and their algorithms and everything else. They have a lot more math experts than I ever will, than you ever will. So we're going to have to trust that their models are probably going to be somewhat useful. So when you see this thing of conversion modeling, that might be some things popping up. Now, if they're not doing that, GA4, also a platform, Google Analytics 4, that's going to be doing modeling like that because it knows that things are going to be out. But even so, let's say this was all modeled and it still came back wrong, right? Where the percentages or where the numbers are different. You can't collect everything. We're missing half the hits here coming through here, right? Half this information has gone back. Let's say this is the real world, but this is actually what we can measure now because the world has changed. If that's the case, all that starts happening is our percentages adjust. And that's it. That is how we solve this problem as strategists when you're thinking about your measurement and marketing strategies. So instead of going, okay, well, I know that 10% go from step 1 to step 2 and 30% of those go from my checkout to a thank you page, and just knowing that's the way it works, just because it has been doesn't mean it's going to be, because the tech is changing. Therefore, the map is changing. So that means the numbers in the map are going to change. So now all of a sudden, if we do, 3 divided by 5, so that's roughly 60%. So what I'm saying here is 60% of the people who see this step end up buying. And then here, it's 5 out of 100, right? 5%. So this is kind of what our new map would hypothetically look like. And so I would say, okay, the map is changing. I start getting information coming through. So then what do? We keep measuring because you want truth is in the trend, powers in the powder. Just because it happened 1 week doesn't mean it wasn't a blip, right? So, and if the map continues to change, and this is where you would keep measuring it, right? So the map is changed, right? It has changed. And that's where we measure it again, right? And you still see these somewhat consistent results, plus or minus, right? Again, it's a pattern. You need to look for a few, days or weeks as you're going through here, but you'll start to see this pattern. And you all of a sudden, you will see, okay, the map is now useful again. Because now I just say, well, I got to send 100 hits to this thing. Of those 100, 5% will show up here. Of those, 60% will close. I can still impact this number. And if I want to double this number, I can double that number. Or I can work a little bit to try to, get this up if I think that, 5% is not maxed out. But mostly I'll be focusing on this. Let's say I need 200 people, because of the 200 people, 10 will come to be measured at this stage. And of those 10, 60% will close to be 6 sales. Right? And that's how we can start to predict, because the map has changed. Now, this is key when you're thinking about this. Just because the map changed, the territory didn't. And this is the other thing that I think people kind of skip over a little bit, and they freak out because they think, oh my God, no one's gonna be buying anything on iOS. That's not true. Users, the users of the apps, to them, they're just not being measured anymore, right? It's a better, calmer, peaceful world from their perspective. So they're still buying stuff. They're still interacting with our pages. They're still clicking on links. They're still loading pages. They're spending on time and scrolling and all the other things that they do. That is the territory. The real user's behavior, the real world is the territory, the real world, not the map. The map is changing, not the territory. That's it. The market is still the market. They're still interacting with stuff. But how we can measure it, the perspectives that we use, right, is going to look a little different. Our percentages are going to change. That's all that's going to happen. Your percentages are going to change, and you have to think it through a little differently than you once did. And if you can make that tiny adjustment, that's the first step to this whole thing, is to make that tiny adjustment and go, okay, I am just going to be measuring it differently. I won't have access to every single step, and that's okay because I just need my percentages. My percentages will be different, but they will still be useful. That map will still be able to be there. Now, so that's the first step of this, right? The map has changed, not the territory. Now, the other thing that's going on here is, because I know people are going to ask about attribution, right? Traffic attribution, everything else. Remember, some stuff will still be measured, so traffic attribution will still be intact for that, and your percentages will just be different for those, right? I might know, for example, if I'm sending in Facebook traffic. So if I have Facebook traffic coming through here, and I'm just going to make these blue for little traffic sources. So if I have Facebook traffic, I would just split it up and I would know, Facebook and causing 3 sales, and these are my percentages. That's it. I might have a whole other thing. Again, depends how your measurement setup is created. So I might have a whole other thing that's like, okay, I've got another traffic source, right? Maybe it's Google or organic or whatever that I'm measuring for. And that's a whole separate thing. As long as you've got your cross-domain measurement and everything else all set up. Again, if that doesn't mean anything to you, because you're more on the strategist side of things, just work with your implementation team and make sure that they are getting that useful truth for you. But assuming they are, then this is, kind of what it looked like. So traffic attribution, you can still figure out where stuff is coming from. Just the percentages might be different for each one. And you'll start to understand how these work. Technically, we can do this now. You do this today anyway. So it should not impact this as much, right? You just got to realize the percentages are going to change, what the percentages between each step. And if you never knew those, now's a good time to know them, because this is how you know the map, right? How to navigate through your marketing results. You have to have these how numbers, these percentages. If you only know your overall conversion percentage of, I convert 1% of the people who go through my funnel, that's not enough. You got to know all these individual steps. You have to know how they interact. In my case, I know how they interact through a page. So I know the number of people who stay 10 seconds, how many people actually are there, scroll halfway through at 45 seconds, how many people are looking at an offer for a few seconds. I measure all those micro conversion steps because they're important. I need to understand how users are using the funnel, right? I need to understand how users are using the funnel. So I'm going to show you one other thing, and we're going to move on to something after this, because I want to also help you to kind of get an idea of how and why this doesn't really matter all that much, right? Why the idea that you can't keep everything, right? That you can't measure everything. And remember, in true sense of the word, you never could. We all thought we could because we were told by all the platforms, we're measuring everything. You put pixels on all your pages and everybody shows up. That's never actually been a thing. It's just that now it's really apparent it's not going to be a thing. Okay. So technically you're just facing a view of reality that's always been there. Just didn't maybe realize it as much. Now you're going to feel it a little more, and that's okay. And the reason it's okay, and I'm just going to bring this up here. I just Googled sample size calculator because I want to talk about something called sample size. So I'm going to zoom this in a little bit and I want to show you some stuff. So now sample size basically says how many times do you have to ask a question in order to figure out how most people are going to answer the question most of the time, right? That's all sample size is. So how many times do I have to, ask somebody something to know that the answers they're giving me are pretty much what everyone else is going to say. And it doesn't matter how many more times I ask, I'm not going to change that answer. So this is sample size. So I'm going to say, we want to be, 3% margin, right? Plus or minus for 3%. Let's say we have a population of 1 person, right? And I hit calculate. This one should work for me. Maybe it's not. Hang on, let me see if I can find a better calculator. I know I had a good one earlier. Let's see if I can find one. I'm trying to find one that's kind of, let's use SurveyMonkey's and see if theirs is going to be here. So let's see. I want to try to get a small population size if it'll let us. So we're going to do a population of size. And nope. All right. Man, I thought it was going to work. I should have had this pulled up earlier because I found a great one right before this workshop. And of course, I can't find it anywhere right now. It did exactly what I wanted to do. None of this is doing it. So I apologize. I might have to make this another workshop. I'm going to try this one real quick and see if this is going to do what I want it to do. Okay. So let's say I have a population size of 1. Oh, man, it's not going to do it. That's okay. Let's do 10. Let's try this. It's going to do it. All right. This will be close enough. Here's how this is going to work. So we have currently, I'm going to be 95% confident, right? 95% confident within a margin of error of 5%. Right? That I want, and I'm going to ask, I have a population of 10 people, and I want to predict how those 10 people are going to answer. I need to ask all 10. That's what this is saying, right? I need to ask all 10. Now, if I want the same results, I'm going to be, let's say, I'm going to change this to 99%, right? Margin of error of 5%. Let's reduce this down to 3%. I'm just going to recalculate real quickly. Still 10, right? So I need to ask 10 people, basically. To predict how 10 people are going to react, I need to be able to ask 10 people. Now, to predict how 100 people are going to react. And think about political polls, stuff like that. If there's 100 people in the group, and I want to be 99% sure, plus or minus 3%, of how 100 are going to answer, I need to ask at least 95, collect my information, and then I can predict out how the whole 100 is. That basically is saying you got to still ask about everybody, right? But watch what happens here. I go to 1,000. In order to predict out 1,000, still need to ask a lot, right? Over half of them, but less. Right? So I need to ask at least, in order to predict how 1,000 are going to behave, I need to get a sample of at least 650. And then watch what happens as we go up even more. 10,000. Now, 1,561. So the sample size doubled, but I'm 10x the population. So I need less people here to predict how more people are going to behave. And then for those of you who are blessed to have enough traffic, let's say 100,000. Notice I add 3 extra 100 people, right? So I went from 1,500 people to 1,800 people. But now I can basically predict how 100,000 people are going to behave with 99% accuracy plus or minus 3%. This is the power of sample size. It's okay. What used to be before, maybe you did get 100,000 hits on your site. But if you don't get them all, but you get a substantial portion of those, this is not a lot, you can predict and have a reasonable model. In other words, all that means is you can have a map. You don't need a lot of information in order to find these numbers. And these numbers are everything to us as measurement marketers. We have to know these numbers. So even if you don't have the world of data that you want or that you once had or that you thought you once had, it's okay. You can still get something useful. Okay. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this one up because I want to make, mostly because I need to get on to some group coaching that we do for our members. So I need to wrap this one up. But I wanted to give you at least the thought of like, okay, yes, iOS is changing stuff. Yes, Apple's changing stuff. Yes, you're going to have less data into the platforms, and it's okay. There are different ways as marketers that we can get into it. We'll cover that in some implementation calls we do in terms of using the Facebook APIs, and there's different tools that'll come out there. Just don't freak out as a marketer yet. Let these changes come through. Realize the map is not the territory. The map is changing. The map indeed has changed, but the territory never did. The buyers still act like they're doing their thing. Just because you can't see them doesn't mean they're not doing it. The map has changed. The representation that you're going to use changes. Focus on learning that and get those systems in play. Eventually, yes, you will start using, there will be, I guarantee you, because I've already seen some of them from some developers that I've been chatting with, there are solutions that are being created to help fill in the gaps, to change these different things, to help, light up a little bit more measurement that wasn't there before. There are ways to do it. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be anywhere near what you were used to doing. But that's still okay because the map, even though the map has changed, the territory hasn't. So just kind of remember that. Hopefully that makes sense. And with that, we will go ahead and bring this one officially to a close. So hopefully you got at least one new thing. Remember, this is a strategy session, so it's a little more theory, a little bit about how to think about stuff. Maybe for those of you who are implementers, gives you some talking points, hopefully, of how to work with your teams to help them through a very difficult time when they think that everything's going dark and they can't measure anything and nothing makes sense anymore and all the numbers are changing, and they are. It's just that the map is changing. Your measurements are always a map of the behaviors that are happening on your site, of how you measure how the world is interacting with your site. It's just changing. That's all. Okay, So with that, if you want more workshops like this one, next week's workshop is a What's New workshop. We do that the first week of every month. So January 2021 updates will be coming out. Talks about what Google's changed with Google Analytics, obviously in this case, GA4, Google Tag Manager, Data Studio, anything else. We'll get you all caught up on those. If you want to make sure that you get that workshop, just subscribe to the channel. Make sure you get notified, and we'll be happy to notify you, let you know it's on the way. You can also become a Measurement Marketing Toolbox member. It is completely free. You get this workshop, these Workshop Wednesdays that are back there. You always have the most recent Workshop Wednesday back there. Plus, you have all of the tools, right? There's a whole bunch of tools that we give away that are back there for our members. There's 40 some odd tools. I know it shows just, 8 different things here. There's a lot back there. So take a look at that if that's of interest. Measure.tips/WW to go ahead and sign up for that. Finally, if you want, the Measurement Marketing Academy is where you would go to learn all of the training, courses, all the workshops are online. There's a whole 200 some odd workshops, individual on-demand library. It's not one of those places where you come and you're like, I want to know how many hours of content I need to go through. There are hundreds and hundreds of hours of content, way too much for anybody to watch. That's not how the Academy's developed. It's literally a place to come and to learn and to take courses, the ones that you want, you can take, to take workshops if you need to focus. You have instructors that you can ask questions of. There is group coaching options available, which is what I need to run off to in just a moment to help out. And you can chat with instructors live. So there's lots of cool things that are available at the Measurement Marketing Academy. Again, measure.tips/getacademy to learn more about that. And with this one, we'll go ahead and officially bring it to a close. This has been Strategy Session, Facebook versus Apple, what you need to know and how to think about things. Appreciate you watching this workshop, and we will see you on the next one.